This is Norway State Prison, and I want you people to know at home TV that if you get up and go get a soda, a glass of beer, go to the bathroom, you might miss it. This is going to be one of the most exciting fights that y'all have seen in a long time. And Eddie Gregory won't go past round 4. James Scott, the uncrowned light heavyweight champion of the world, said that. Is that convincing?
Run up on me, you get pop, throw self-defense. Cops and robbers with them crackers, fuck around and hop the fence. My teacher told me that there's no such thing as common sense.
All right, what's up, everybody? Another episode of the Brooklyn Boxing Podcast. I'm here with George. How's it going, man?
It's going good. Good to be with you. Not in person like we thought it would be, but it's great to be with you nonetheless.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it under, these circumstances. Everyone's trying to stay safe out there, but I appreciate you taking some time. And I know we got some great stories for the viewers and listeners today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So let's, I wanted to jump into your background a little bit, just get people familiar with yourself and your career with HBO and kind of your start in the boxing world.
Well, I mean, my start in the boxing world, I was a kid, grew up loving boxing. Sugar Ray Leonard was at the top of his game when I was a little kid. And I watched this guy fight, the blazing hand speed, just fell in love with the sport. And I was lucky enough to get a job later in life at HBO Sports, where I just worked on the boxing team. And I went from being a fan as a kid to an adult where I got to travel the world and tell the fighters stories and meet them and get to know them. So it's, I was at HBO for over 10 years. And like I said, to be a kid who watched these fighters every weekend at home, to meeting them and getting an insight into their lives and telling their stories. I mean, I owe a lot to the sport.
Yeah, no, I Fernando Villegas, another HBO colleague of yours, former HBO colleague, had a lot of similar thoughts and things to say on that in terms of meeting these icons and these idols of his, face to face, and then also being ringside and being close to them while they're in action, and just how amazing that is, and the difference between being a fan and covering an event. So I think there's a lot of cool perspective there on your side.
Absolutely. I mean, and Fernando told you, he shot many of the biggest fights over the last 10, 15 years. He was there ringside for. So just to be able to, again, as a kid, idolizing these fighters, and then you meet them, and almost every fighter I've met is just a great person, a great person to be around. And being able to tell their stories, I mean, it's really a passion. And I even got I got involved with a fighter a few years ago, managed him for 1 or 2 years, but I worked his corner. I was actually a second assist in his corner for 3 of his fights. So that's just another perspective that I got. I was actually, working a fighter's corner, which is just amazing. So, I could talk about the sport for days.
Was there a boxing experience that you had from like a technical standpoint, or was it more like it was more a manager role, right?
It was a very small team. Fighter's name was Vaughn Alexander, whose brother Devin Alexander is a former world champion. Very small team. And his trainer, actually one of his fights, his trainer said, "Hey, glad you're here. We can really use your help." I said, "Hey, anything I can do." I'm thinking he wants support. And he said, "Hey, can you work the corner?" Now, I wasn't the trainer. My job was simply to get the stool in the ring, get the trainer the water, give him a towel if he needs it. But so it was out of necessity, but I love doing it. It's just another perspective, one that I never thought I would get. But again, to be right there in the action, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been up close and personal to fights and amateur fights and things like that. But to be in someone's corner, I'm sure is a unique experience in itself. So it's pretty cool to hear that you have some experience with that, as well as the media side of things, and it's a pretty broad vision you have there. But
Well,
there's
and real quick on that being in the corner, the thing I was most nervous about, I just didn't want to poke the fighter in the eye. I was like so scared that I was going to do something. So it took me like 3 rounds. My heart was beating like I was in the fight. I didn't want to screw anything up in the corner. Thankfully, it didn't happen. I got the stool in every round. But it's crazy when you're that close, and when your fighter's fighting, the time just flies. So, I mean, it just, before you know it, the fight is over. It's crazy.
So did you guys end up getting the victory?
Got a victory. I worked 3 fights of his. He won 2 of them. He lost the last one.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't even put into words just being right there. You hear people screaming behind you, all the insults that get hurled at fighters during a fight. You hear everything, but just being that close.
Yeah.
Was, I mean, obviously it's the closest I've ever been. That's the closest I've ever been to a fight, except for one time when Mike Tyson fought Lennox Lewis in Tennessee. My job for HBO on that fight was I was the timer. I was working the HBO clock. When you watch a fight, you see the clock in the lower end of the screen.
Yeah.
I was doing that, and usually with HBO, the clocks in the production truck were interfaced with the ringside clock. This wasn't the case in Tennessee. So I had to sit ringside. I sat literally next to the timekeeper, and I had a headset on, and I would just if there was a stoppage with the clock, I'd have to let them know in the truck, okay, there's a minute left in the round. Well, in the preliminary bouts, the timekeeper had this stopwatch. It was like an old school, like a 60-minute stopwatch. And I have a digital watch, and at some point I said, hey, your clock is like 10 seconds, like the rounds would be like, it was like 15 seconds too long. Like a 3-minute round was 3:15. So I said, if you want, I told him, I said, look, your clock is way off. I don't know if you want to use my clock. He said, it was an older guy. He said, no, that's okay, but I'll just go by your time. So I was kind of the unofficial timekeeper for the Mike Tyson Lennox Lewis fight in Tennessee.
No way.
And it was literally the timekeeper's ringside. And I had a notebook with me. At one point I had blood on it, which was obviously Tyson's blood because he lost that fight. But that was the second closest I've ever been to a fight. But I mean, like I said, I have a passion for this, and I love talking about this stuff. So
yeah, no, that's incredible. I mean, being the the unofficial timekeeper, basically for, one of the biggest heavyweight matchups in the history of the sport.
And it was crazy because, there was the bad blood between the two of them. They had the whole ring sectioned off. Lewis was on one side, Tyson was on the other. But it was crazy because the Pyramid in Memphis, I believe, is where the fight was. And there wasn't that big of a crowd there until right before these guys were about to walk. And that's the first time where I was live at a fight and I felt the crowd's energy. When they would show Tyson on the Jumbotron, like you've probably been to some events when you can feel the crowd, not just hear it, you can like feel the buzz. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, that's like that it factor that, has been missing for many years, and I think is back a little bit. I mean, it's hard to mimic Mike Tyson, obviously, but or Lennox Lewis, but in today's game, we got a little bit of that. I think with the heavyweight division with Wilder and Fury and Joshua, we got some big name guys, some giants, and with some big star power and fans behind them. So it's good to see that. I haven't experienced it firsthand. I'd love to, in the near future, but as I know Anthony Joshua, especially with the UK fans and Tyson Fury, selling out Wembley, 80,000. So it's great to assume that sort of energy is back,
And, I'm a freelancer, and I've done fights for Showtime too. I did 2 fights of Joshua's. Where were we? It wasn't England. Wales. He had 2 fights in Wales, and he fought not big names, and he was selling out. I think it was an 80,000 indoor arena, and he was selling out against guys who were ranked very low, and yeah, the energy in there is crazy. I mean, he's a big draw there. If who knows what's going to happen. Well, first of all, let's hope boxing comes back soon. But if Tyson Fury were to beat Wilder again, a Joshua Fury fight.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it'd be electric.
And they would have to have that. They would have to have that over in the UK. I mean, the economics might dictate that it'd be in Vegas, but that fight would just be massive. I can't even imagine the number of people that they would get in an arena for that fight.
Yeah, no, exactly. That fight would be massive. From a spectacle standpoint, I would hope that they would do it in the UK and just get a crazy amount of fans there. But like you said, money talks, and like it would probably end up, I would assume, maybe in Vegas. But Fury's got to get through that Wilder rematch first. But hopefully, hopefully boxing comes back soon.
Right.
First of all, and to kind of speak to that, I don't know if you've seen a little bit of what's going on with the UFC and Dana White.
Yes.
Credit to him. I think he's really probably the best promoter in combat sports today. He has a fight next weekend that he's putting on at an undisclosed location. A lot of people are speculating it's at like an Indian reservation or something. And then he also bought an island. They don't know where the island is, but apparently he's going to be having any international fighters, because they're not going to fly guys from the US apparently, but
Right.
That's what they're going to be having fights for the next few months, which is it's insane. It's like, it's like a Bruce Lee movie or like Mortal Kombat. It's like,
Right. Just on some undisclosed island, these guys are fighting.
yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's wild to think about, but at the same time, you have to give him a ton of credit, and it makes me wonder if boxing is taking note of that and maybe trying to get a little creative in their approach as well. I know DAZN has a lot of money behind them right now. I know they're spending a lot, but I'd be interested what the mindset is of some of these promoters after seeing things like that. And, we get the cancellation of the Joshua versus Pulev fight. Things are starting to be held up. So I wonder if these guys are starting to think like, if Dana White and the UFC are going to take advantage of this and stream their fights for free on ESPN, get all that viewership. I hope that they're thinking of ways to get creative.
Well, I think, obviously the health is first for all the people involved.
Right.
And if they can create a healthy environment, I mean, I used to be a huge wrestling fan, but WWE just had WrestleMania. They just had WrestleMania with no fans, but they did it. Credit to them. And I haven't heard of anyone involved with them getting sick. So you're right. If Dana White can pull this off in a healthy environment, everyone's watching. I mean, there's nothing, if you're a boxing fan or a combat sports fan, there's nothing else to do. So if there's going to be UFC, everyone's going to be watching.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll definitely, they'll try and replicate that if they can do it in a safe way. And they should. Exactly.
I mean, that's like the opportunity behind it, where if DAZN or, Showtime, whoever could create an event, stack a card with a lot of boxing's best fighters, not even just those heavyweight guys. It's a great opportunity for exposure if it can be done safely. So it'll be interesting the next couple months what the boxing world does to respond to all of this.
Right, because like you said, we have no idea we don't know when life is. I mean, who knows what normal is going to be in the future, but we have no idea when sports is going to come back.
Right. No, exactly. So hopefully they come up with some ideas there. But to get back to sort of that conversation about the energy within the arena, I know there was one event in particular that you worked on closely that must have had a energy that was completely unique. And that's, centered around the story of James Scott, a guy who, fought in prison, was troubled really his whole life in and out of prison, but was able to be on HBO in prison, with Sugar Ray Leonard and Larry Merchant commentating on it and almost getting to a title fight. So, I mean, that's just kind of an overview there, but I'd love for you to kind of dive into the beginning of that story.
Well, it's something I didn't get to work on, but the story is I grew up in Rahway, New Jersey. So I'm a big boxing fan. So I especially knew who James Scott was because he was an inmate in Rahway State Prison, which, by the way, isn't technically in Rahway. It's in a city called Avenel, but it's 5 minutes from my house. When I was older, I would run past the prison. So this is in my backyard. So I knew who James Scott was. I watched him fight as a kid. And when I got to HBO, I realized that his very first televised fight was in 1978 against a guy named Eddie Gregory back then. And HBO was they were young in the boxing world. You've read about they took their cameras to a prison, to a maximum security prison. And Eddie Gregory, who became Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, who he also won a light heavyweight title, this guy was the #1 contender at 175 pounds, went into a prison thinking, I'll beat this guy. They're paying me money. I'm going to fight James Scott. And he lost. And James Scott dominated the fight. It was a story. When I was at HBO, I pitched this. It could be an incredible documentary because they have hours and hours of footage. They sent Larry Merchant to the prison a few weeks before the fight. And I talked to Larry about this, and he would love to do something. But they did a feature on James Scott. And again, Sugar Ray Leonard went into that prison too to call the fight. But the fact that this would never happen today. Networks aren't going into a prison to shoot a fight.
Was there initial pushback, like at the even idea of this, or like how did James Scott get to the point where boxing promoters were like taking notice?
Well, he was in and out of prison. He grew up he was born in Newark, was incarcerated for most of his life, in and out of prison.
And he had a stint through Miami, right, as well, where he was professional in Miami, and then he was training out of the Fifth Street gym in Miami, where Ali trained, where Angelo Dundee owned the gym. So He was working. I don't think he was working with Angelo Dundee. I know he worked with Ferdy Pacheco, who was Ali's doctor. But yeah, he turned pro. He won a bunch of fights. He was in and out of prison, in and out of Rahway. I want to say somewhere in the mid 70s, he was back in prison. Rahway had a boxing program that the warden of the prisons thought it was a good thing for prisoners. So they started a boxing program. James Scott was a pro, so he and the warden spoke, and I think the warden wanted some publicity for himself and for the prison. They started a boxing program, and James Scott had been a rising light heavyweight. Suddenly, HBO was there. He wins that fight against Eddie Gregory. CBS, NBC, he had 7 fights on network TV from prison. Insane. And the crazy thing with like the kind of underlying storyline, at least it seemed from watching some of these videos, like people can go check him out on YouTube. Just search James Scott and you can see this footage. But the underlying theme for me, it really seemed like not only was he fighting, to win, but he was really trying to get people to allow him to get that title shot and also allow kind of change his image to be released from prison. Because I know they didn't want to give him that title shot, of course, because of his image as a prisoner, and he wasn't gonna, that'd be a tough representation of the sport to have a world champion who's an inmate. But that's something that he was actively trying to change, and I don't know if he ever really was able to change that perception because he never got the opportunity. But I don't know what the perception was from the fans at the time, if they were just kind of amazed by the fact that he was a prisoner, or if people outside the prison really started to kind of like fall in love with the guy and his story.
Well, I mean, this was in my backyard when I was a kid, so I knew who he was. And I think boxing fans across the board were rooting for the guy. Now, as a fighter, maybe not so much as a person, but he definitely, his popularity. I mean, he fought 7 times. You wouldn't fight on network TV back then unless you drew ratings. And his story was that incredible where, people wanted to watch. And to have his first fight be against the #1 contender and decisively beat him, he thought he was going to get a title shot. I think, and that was his fight with Eddie Gregory was in 78.
Didn't they fight a couple times?
Hmm?
Did they fight a couple times? Or
he only fought Gregory once. In fact, in the post-fight interview, Mike Rossman was one of the light heavyweight champions back then. He said that, when he won the title, he would give Eddie Gregory first shot at the title. They never had a rematch. And somewhere around 1979 or 80, I think the WBA, one of the boxing organizations, I don't think they took James Scott very seriously at first until he started beating these names. And then someone in the political world of boxing said, hey, this might not be a good look to have a prisoner have one of our belts around his waist. So the WBA, I think it was in 79, they removed him from the rankings. So I think once they did that, Scott, he lost 2 of his last 3 fights after that ruling. So I think that took all the wind out of his sails.
Yeah.
Because he knew he would never get that title shot. He was in prison on a murder charge, which he was contesting. He was found guilty of it while he was in prison. So he found out he would never get out of prison. So, I think that ended his run. But for a few years, I mean, it was just an incredible story. And it's one that would never be replicated today. In fact, a lot of prisons today, I think most prisons don't have boxing programs. They're trying to do everything with no violence. Whether or not it was good for the fighters, for James Scott, it made him into an entity, a name. And it's just an incredible story. And it doesn't even have to be, when I was at HBO, again, HBO has a ton of footage on him in his cell, interviews with Larry Merchant. But whoever does the story, which I would love to be involved with, he fought 7 times and he's got an incredible story. And if you have a passion for any kind of storytelling, that passion drives you. And what I've heard a lot in boxing is people say, pundits or critics of boxing, oh, it's the same old story. It's a poor guy from the streets and he rises up and he wins a championship. Every story is different, and you can tell every story differently. All these stories are different. And James Scott's story is just really powerful. And again, they'll never be, should never say never, but I don't think in our lifetimes there'll ever be another scenario where that's going to happen, where a guy in prison is fighting on network TV.
Yeah, I mean, the only guy that really comes to mind, recently is Bernard Hopkins, who wasn't actively, he wasn't fighting how James Scott was. Like he was I believe like jail state champ or something along those lines while they had a boxing program while he was incarcerated. But so similar in that sense, he was part of a jail boxing program and he was a champion at it. I believe that's kind of how he got his start, actually. So Bernard Hopkins, a little bit, similar there. And then once he got out, of course, had the great career that, you know, Hall of Fame career that he had. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's no one, you know, of recent memory or even the idea of someone going into a prison to fight an inmate is just, you know, it just doesn't seem realistic at all in terms of, you know, today's.
No, I agree. And, you know, you bring up Bernard Hopkins, and not to get off the subject, but Bernard Hopkins, I did a few stories on him when I was at HBO. He was one of the first fighters I ever interviewed. And if you know anything about Bernard Hopkins, you know he can talk. And he can talk, and he can talk. I was supposed to do a 20-minute interview. It ended up being close to 3 hours. And it took me, and I was nervous. I had my questions, and, you know, I probably wasn't listening to the answers. But Bernard, you could ask Bernard, you know, Bernard, what's 1 + 1? And it would take him 20 minutes to answer. But I realized after about an hour or so, every time he would take a breath or a quick pause, I would jump in with a question. But it took me about an hour to realize this is not going to get done unless I jump in whenever he stopped, because Bernard can talk. But not to get off the point, but yeah, you know, no fighter's going to go into prison today. Well, first of all, there's no, even if there were boxing programs in prison, you know, Tyson Fury is not going to, or Canelo is not going to take on a contender in a prison. It just won't, it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think about too, in terms of the inmates in the crowd. You know, when you were watching the event, I'd imagine there was high security around the ring, because the inmates were allowed to watch, you know, out of their cells, right? I mean, there was like bleachers set up almost.
I think the way they had it was, they had paying customers that were ringside, and they had another section of the prison where they had monitors, and that's where the inmates were.
Okay.
So I think, I mean, I'm pretty sure they had them separate. But if you watch that James Scott Eddie Gregory fight, you know, Len Berman,
you can hear them cheering for James.
You can hear them, and Len Berman, who was an NBC sports guy for years and years, he was the roving reporter. They would go to him every so often. He was in the inmates side of the prison, so these guys are all behind him. Like, he's got like inmates right behind him where he's giving his on cameras, you know, about the fight and how these guys are feeling, and they're right there. He's like right there with the prisoners. So they actually had people paid tickets. They paid money for a ticket, but as far as I know, there was no intermingling of, you know, you weren't like sitting ringside next to an inmate from the prison. But it's just a unique scenario. I mean, I can't imagine, you know, I've talked to Larry Merchant about it, and he couldn't believe, well, actually he could believe, he said, you know, HBO was so new and they were willing to try new things, and he loved the fact that they were at a prison. I don't know if Sugar Ray Leonard loved it, but, you know, he loved the fact that they were doing something that no one else did. Then after HBO did it, CBS and NBC, they broadcast James Scott's fights. But, you know, Ross Greenberg, who I believe was a producer back then at HBO, Ross and I have talked numerous times. Ross was the head of HBO for years. And he's, in fact, not long after you and I met in person in early March, I was supposed to meet with Ross just for lunch, and I really wanted to talk to him about James Scott. Not so much to push a doc or anything, just to talk to him about his experiences, because I don't know if he produced that fight, but I know he was very involved in that fight coming together. It was unique, and HBO, they jumped, you know, they jumped on the opportunity. HBO back then, they did roller derby, they did all these other crazy sports besides boxing. And back then, the networks, they controlled boxing. I mean, you had fights on every single weekend on network. So HBO, they saw that, they said, hey, you don't want to go to the prison? We'll go to the prison and shoot this fight. And they did.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think HBO, like what you just mentioned in terms of their hustle early on is something that's really missing in today's game. You know, I know DAZN's really doing they're trying their best and pouring a lot of money into their boxing content. But there's a lot of other promotions and networks that are lacking in some ways. They're reusing a lot of old footage for upcoming fights. There really just seems like there's a lacking there in terms of the sense of urgency to promote and to push these events.
You're right.
You know, HBO, like hearing you say that HBO was really hustling back then and willing to really take risks. That's something that needs to be brought back in a lot of ways, and is lacking now.
I agree. And, you know, I was with HBO when they started 24/7, which was just historic, the insight that they got to the boxers and helped make Floyd Mayweather a star. You know, I think that Fox Sports is doing that now with, I work with a company called Five Films, a great company. And we do a lot of the countdown shows, things that HBO used to do, a 24/7 type show, countdown shows, all promoting the fight. When I was a kid, when I would watch a fight, especially HBO back then would do a feature, whatever the main event was, they would do a feature on both guys. So you got a sense of who they were. And that made me a fan. I mean, I was going to watch the fights regardless, but that storytelling made me a fan. And, you know, Showtime has done a great job with that, with All Access. There's no more HBO Sports. So Fox Sports is doing that with countdown shows and all the stories, you know, building it. It's about building up these fighters.
Right.
And it's the only way that people are going to find out a little bit about what makes them tick. And you're either going to like the person or you're not. And chances are you will like them once you know their story. So you're right. I mean, the hustle to do that in the promotional sense, it's been kind of lacking. But, you know, Showtime they're still doing their thing. DAZN, like you said, is pouring a bunch of money. Fox Sports is heavily invested in boxing. And I hope it continues once our world situation clears up.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of fighters out there that need, you know, the spotlight on them in terms of their personality and getting those personalities out there. Cause, you know, like you mentioned, and like, you know, Fernando had mentioned in our podcast, there's so much importance on telling the story behind these fighters and getting the fans to be invested in these guys' journey. You know, that's what's really going to drive viewership and sales, because at the end of the day, the fight's not always going to deliver. It's not always going to be Gotti Ward, but
Right.
But you want people to be invested in the person. And, you know, kind of to draw it back to Dana White in the UFC, I really do think that he's doing it right in a lot of ways. You know, recently, obviously with the Fight Island thing and all that, you know, he's always in the headlines, but you know, I think boxing now can learn a lot from Dana White in terms of how he highlights his fighters and how he really shows their personalities to their fan base. I think they do a tremendous job of that. And they get that kind of rabid fan base to get attached to these guys and really know their stories, which is missing in boxing. You know, you look at Deontay Wilder, for instance, and, you know, only recently have people really been drawn to him and really, you know, become big fans of him in the US. And this is a guy that's, he looks the part, you know, he's intimidating as hell. He's knocking everyone out cold.
Right.
He's everything that you want in an American, you know, heavyweight knockout artist champion, like a Tyson. Yet no one really knew who he was 3-4 years ago, unless you were a boxing fan, which is just it just kind of shows the state of the promotional game in boxing.
I agree 1,000%. I mean, it used to be everyone knew who the heavyweight champion was. Everyone knew. And you don't have to go back to Ali and Rocky Marciano. Everyone knew who Mike Tyson was. You know, everyone knew who Evander Holyfield was. Somewhere after that, and I think in this country, a lot of it had to do with the lack of an American heavyweight. But you're right, the hustle hasn't been there because you heard for years, well, you know, boxing, basketball and football are taking all the good athletes and no one's going into boxing. So there's no great American heavyweights. So that's why people aren't into boxing. Deontay Wilder was the heavyweight champion for a few years. And like you said, it took too long for people here to know who he was.
Yeah,
again, people used to know who the heavyweight champion was. And you're right, that promotion, that storytelling, that hustle, that has to be there because the fighters can't do it themselves. They need a vehicle to get their story out there. And Dana White, you know, UFC, they're very unique because they don't have to deal with the politics that boxing does.
Exactly.
That's why you see all the best fighters fight each other. And I hope I'm alive the day that happens in boxing. I don't know if it will because there's too much greed, there's too much corruption. But Dana White is doing it the right way. And thankfully for him, he can do it the right way. It's just so tough with boxing because it's not only the politics of the organizations, you know, the politics of the networks. Now, thankfully, with Wilder and Fury fighting, ESPN and Fox, they got together. It's been done before. You know, Tyson and Lewis, HBO and Showtime. Pacquiao and Mayweather, same thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, you would hope at the end of the day, these guys want to make money. And the easiest way to make money is have the best fighters fight each other.
Yeah.
You know, and unfortunately, the politics often get in the way. But Dana White, man, you know, and the rumors are that he's going to get involved in boxing. He's going to promote boxing. I wish he would.
Yeah.
I wish he would.
I think there's a legitimate. Well, first of all, he said that he's going to do it, and I don't think he's just saying that. I think he really is going to get involved in boxing. I know him and Floyd, you know, have been talking. Right. I don't know what the partnership is there. You never know with Floyd if he's going to fight again or what's going on. But I hope he does because you know it's a very, very tall order for him to kind of consolidate everything like how he did with the UFC. But if there is a way to kind of get rid of the alphabet soup where there's the WBC, IBO, IBF, WBA, all that, you know, it's just better for the fans when there's one champion per weight division, you know, maybe an interim belt as well. But when you make it like that, it's just the best fight the best way more often. You know, the fight cards that you can build then are just far different. I mean, imagine if you had Tyson Fury versus Wilder this past matchup, and then the co-main event is Canelo versus you know, Kovalev, and then you had Terrence Crawford on there as well with Spence, and like there's huge cards that could be built if this was able to happen. And it's really boxing that's hurting itself, unfortunately, and all these sanctioning bodies and promoters, and it's a mess. So, I mean, hopefully, I really do hope that Dana White could fix that because it could do tremendous things for the sport.
It's just you know, it's a big hill. It's not a hill to climb. It's a mountain to climb. But, you know, that's the number one killer of the sport, the politics of it, and why the best fighters don't fight. It's, you know, usually in boxing, they do end up fighting, not always at the right time. Mayweather and Pacquiao should have fought 5 years before they fought. They should have fought 5 years before, and they didn't. They eventually got around to fight. It shouldn't take that. When you think about it, it's a very simple solution. You put on good fights. You have the best fighters fighting each other, and people will watch.
Right.
It's very simple, and I know it's easier said than done. It's just too bad. You know, when you know boxing, and I'm sure you've had conversations with people who don't really know the sport. When you try to explain the sport, when they say, well, who's the heavyweight champion? And you have to rattle out like 3 names or 4 names. And you say, oh, well, one guy's the super champion and the other guy's the regular champion. It sounds very illogical.
Right.
And you find yourself sounding foolish when you try to describe the sport to someone who doesn't know. And it's a shame it's like that. You know, it might never get to the day where there's one champion in each division. But look, and I respect the fact that fighters love titles and belts, and they should. They should want to be champion and defend that belt. But let's have these guys, let's have the best fighters fight each other. And, you know, that'll solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm curious to see where things will head in the next couple of years. I hope the DAZN survives. You know, I have heard some rumors that they are struggling in some ways. You know, I know they're pouring a ton of money into it, and I don't know if it's really all going well, to be honest. I don't know. I've heard there's rumors that it's not. But I want them to win because I think what they're doing with their subscription service is great. You know, who doesn't want to have a subscription service where they can watch Canelo fight 4 times a year for, you know, $100 rather than paying the traditional pay-per-view model. Right. So I hope they continue to sign those A-list fighters and make noise. You know, Tyson Fury's the king as of now. I mean, with Joshua obviously he's still got to fight Joshua to decide that, but he's with, you know, Tyson's with ESPN Plus. So like I said, like we talked about, there's a lot going on in
right.
A lot of networks.
And I'm the same as you. You know, I want to see the best fight the best. And if the DAZN can produce that, more power to them. Who knows how they're doing? I mean, you know, Ryan Garcia, who's one of their big, you know, young up and coming fighters. I read something the other day where he said the Tank Davis fight should be an $80 pay-per-view on DAZN. And that completely goes against everything DAZN is promoting. They're saying, no, it's not pay-per-view. You pay this price and you'll get pay-per-view type fights. You're right. They're pouring a lot. I mean, over $300 million to Canelo, over $100 million to Golovkin. I don't know how much Joshua's getting.
Yeah, Mikey Garcia.
A lot of money.
Paid. Yeah. There's
a lot of money. And, you know, we'll see. And look, DAZN has a hell of a roster. They've got a lot of great fighters. I just don't want fights to not be made because this guy's with DAZN and this guy's with Fox. So we can't fight. Al Heyman, and let these guys, you know, Al Heyman, everything I know about him, he's a very astute, smart businessman. Let's get these guys together, and whether it be DAZN, Fox, ESPN, these networks can work together because in the end it's about money, and these fights will make money. But
right.
It's been the same problem for decades.
Yeah. So, I mean, it'll be interesting. It'll be really interesting the next couple months, you know, hopefully once everything settles down with the virus and things kind of get back to normal. You know, I'd imagine that these promoters and these networks, you know, with these dry months, they need big cash fights. So it's putting pressure on them, I'd imagine, to make fights like this happen and put big fights together and get the ball rolling on that. So I hope, you know, coming out of this, there's some urgency to do that and some big matchups towards, you know, the middle end of 2020 because there's plenty there. You know, there's so many there.
Yeah. These fighters, they all want to fight. This is how they make their living. And not everyone pulls in the big money like Pacquiao or Joshua. You know, these guys they're just like us. They
right.
have to work to live. And all these Americans and people around the world who aren't working, we have to work to survive. They have to fight to live. So there's a lot of fighters who, once this is cleared up, that are going to want to fight and need to fight. There's a lot of networks that want to get those fights going.
They need the cash, yeah.
So hopefully this helps spur, like you said, it helps spur things along. And I mean, I think once this clears up, and pray every day that it does, so we can get back to some normalcy. And as a boxing fan, you want to see the fights, and hopefully that happens sooner rather than later.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, to close it out here, I'd like to get some of your opinions on some fights that hopefully take place in the next few months. I know there's rumors with Andy Ruiz and Dillian White. Of course, Joshua and Pulev is already scheduled. So those are a couple of heavyweight matchups. I'd be interested to see your take, and also maybe what you think might be next for Canelo.
Andy Ruiz and White. Look, the question about Andy Ruiz is he ever going to be close to that fighter that beat Joshua the first time? It happens. So I guess I've never understood how a fighter who, and it's like with Buster Douglas too, they win the fight of their lives. They're big underdogs. Andy Ruiz was being served up on a platter for Anthony Joshua. This was his first fight in America. And Ruiz upset the apple cart and, had a big money rematch. But then you have to think, how is he not thinking, man, I beat Joshua again, and then the amount of money I'm going to get to fight Deontay Wilder or anyone, it's going to be beyond anything I've ever dreamed. And it just doesn't happen. So I don't know who's going to train Ruiz. I mean, Teddy Atlas is rumored.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
Him.
Yeah.
Ruiz, it's amazing, but he even says, I'm a fat guy that can fight. He was, no one mistakes him for, a muscle bound. He's doesn't look like the prototypical fighter until he gets in the ring and his hands start to go. So the guy's incredibly talented. I think that if he gets his mind right, I think White's a tough fighter. I think Ruiz wins that fight. But again, you have no idea which fighter's going to show up.
Right.
Who's going to train him? He blamed his trainer for him not being in shape. I want to see the fight. And again, if Andy Ruiz shows up in shape, I think he wins the fight. But we'll see.
We'll see. There's some good ones on the horizon. So, I'm excited for it. And, like we were just talking about, I hope the urgency is there coming out of this to get these big matchups. So
I do too. And you mentioned Canelo. I mean, I think Joshua beats Pulev. I think it's Joshua's had 2 tough fights back to back. So I think Pulev is tough, but I think Joshua wins that fight. Canelo, with Saunders, with the debacle that he just pulled off, like with Canelo, who's he going to fight? What weight class is he going to fight in? If the sense of urgency is right, maybe he fights Triple G. I don't know about next. I think they both would prefer a fight in between, but hopefully that fight happens sooner than later. I think that fight is happening.
The network could push for that. Yeah.
Right. Well, they wanted it. That's why they signed both guys. I mean, I think Triple G, fighters don't beat Father Time. They might beat him off here and there, but Father Time always wins. And I think Triple G is on the downslope. But look, great fighters can often come up with one more great night. And hopefully, Canelo, I'd like to see him fight Triple G. The Saunders fight would have been interesting. But, I mean, your guess is as good as mine now, as to who he fights next. I don't know.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be interesting. I do think a lot about that with Triple G in terms of he is it appears to be on the downslope, but like you said, a guy like him who's as tough as he is and as talented and he's always got one more left in him, and that's the one for him to get up for.
You're right. And look, I thought he won the first fight with Canelo. That second fight was close too.
Very close, yeah.
But, time is moving on, and Triple G did not look good in his last fight.
No.
Against Deverenchenko. He did not look good, but, great fighters, it happens. can have that one last big fight in him. And
Yeah, I mean, Pacquiao's still going.
I mean, Pacquiao is just, I got to work on Pacquiao fought Keith Thurman, and I got to work on Fox's show Fight Camp. It's very much like a 24/7. It was 4 episodes, and I've interviewed both he and Freddie Roach before, even when Pacquiao was much younger, and to be able to tell that story, like to still see, it's like magic when you see Freddie Roach and Manny work together on the mitts. It's magic seeing those guys. And you're right, this guy's 40 years old, and he just kicked Keith Thurman's ass.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, that was an amazing for the first round. I was just on the floor.
It was like out of a movie. And you know what's incredible? That combination that Pacquiao used to knock Thurman down. When Pacquiao was training for the fight, Freddie Roach has always been great about letting camera crews shoot. Like we could shoot sparring. Once in a while he'd say to turn the cameras off. But the last 2 weeks of camp, we had a crew in Hollywood, filming them. So the last 2 weeks, there were certain days where they didn't want us to film the mitts. Like we couldn't shoot the first 15 minutes of mitt sessions. And it turns out that he was working certain combinations. That combination he threw in the first round, I found out later, was one of the things they were working on. And, you're right, watching that fight, seeing him knock Keith Thurman down in that first round was just, I jumped up.
Oh, yeah.
It was just like, holy shit, what's going on here?
Yeah. No, that was incredible. It's like, Manny, I can't doubt him. I don't know who he's going to fight next, but whoever it is, like, I'll be riding with Manny at this point. He's a legend. I got to root for him.
At 40 years old. And he's clearly not what he was. He wasn't what he was when he fought Mayweather.
That's the thing that does concern me a little with Manny is like his performance against Thurman was awesome. Like it was all time, but now it's like, what's next for him? Is he I heard rumors with him and Mikey Garcia, which I kind of like that matchup. But then who else at 147? Because I don't want to see him versus Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence. And those are matchups that could be made. And I know Manny wouldn't be afraid to take it because that's just who he is. And the way he seems, like he doesn't seem quite as light on his feet as he once was. And he falls into a lot of his shots, it seems like. And, if you're falling straight in against a Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence and they catch you, it could be bad news. But, that being said, in any of those matchups, I'm going to be pulling for Manny.
Yeah. How could you not root for him? It seems like, the guy's been around over 20 years. So, I would think that if and when he fights again, it'll be against Mikey Garcia. Or
that's no slight. That's no slight to Mikey. Obviously, it's
right.
Just Mikey at 147 is more manageable for.
Right. Exactly.
Mikey's not really a welterweight. I don't know. He's kind of just being a little stubborn. It seems like he's just like, I want to be at welterweight after he lost.
His dad and his brother have told him, and he said it in interviews. Yeah, they want me to fight at 140, but he wants to win a belt at one. Look, he's a great fighter. He's had a great history. So if that's his choice, so be it.
Yeah.
We saw how he looked against Errol Spence.
A little small. Yeah, he's just, yeah.
And if you take two, it's like the old story. You take a great little fighter and a great big fighter, the great big fighter is going to win. If all things are being equal, the bigger guy is going to win. So, but Manny, I'm always going to be a Manny Pacquiao fan. So he will fight again. I think it's going to be against Mikey.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. So I'm going to look forward to that matchup. But, yeah, man, I appreciate you taking some time to chat. It was a lot of fun to go through that James Scott story. It's an amazing story. I urge everyone listening and watching to go check it out on YouTube. There's a lot of footage out there of his fights and some of the jail footage as well. So thanks again, George.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
It was fun. Let's do it every night.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll have to do it again, but stay safe, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great.
See you, man.
All right.